was muted. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Tara Hallowell, and I'm a parent of Lincoln High School student. I use any pronouns with kindness, and I'm a co-chair of the Lincoln High School PTSA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Our committee is working to host events throughout the year that we hope that will be more than just learning opportunities. We hope they'll also be starting points for making connections and continuing conversations. I hope that via Zoom, we're reaching a mix of parents, teachers, and students this evening. Please take a look through the participant list and find someone to contact in the next day or two to reflect on what you've learned and what you can do next. Many of us are working to improve DEI in both our personal and community lives, and some even do this work in professional settings. So tonight, I'm honored to introduce my DEI committee co-chair, Jonathan Cantor, who will present ideas that he and his colleagues have been working on for almost a decade. I will let Jonathan introduce himself more in detail, but briefly, Jonathan is a clinical psychological scientist who researches bias and microaggressions and how to give effective anti-racism trainings. He's on the core leadership team of the Office of Healthcare Equity at UW-Medicine, where he works with the team to provide training on anti-racism, bias, and microaggressions across the system. He also consults on DEI issues for higher education, medical, and legal organizations around the country. This talk that he's sharing with us tonight has been well received by groups across the country. So we're very excited to host this event, and I will now turn it over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Tara, and welcome everybody. It's really nice to be doing this event with you all. I see the participant list and I see a bunch of names that I know and recognize, and it's really nice to see everybody. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. Let's see here. That's not quite right. That looks better. So you saw these if you got here early. If you enjoy today's presentation or just want to keep learning or are interested in our work and want to join us, please email us. That was the automatic advance. I'll talk more about this later. This event that we're doing tonight is a free event, and we have a whole series of events that we're planning over the next year or two. It will stop auto advancing. We have a whole series of events that we're planning over the next year or two. And some of the events will be fundraisers to support a variety of things related to diversity, equity, inclusion, not just here at Lincoln High School, but across Seattle Public Schools. There's an equity fund that we can talk to you more about that we're also going to be supporting with our fundraising efforts. And so we are specifically going to be launching this thing that I'm going to be doing for free in the service of fundraising, which is a course, a 6-week course. And I'm not going to get into the details of it now, but I'm happy to talk more about it later. And we're hoping people will be interested in supporting fundraising for diversity at Seattle Public Schools and Lincoln High School with this course and in other ways. So Tara said I would introduce myself a little more. You know, I'm not going to introduce myself too much more, but I will say, honestly, as a white man doing this work, sometimes I have to introduce myself a lot to establish credibility. I think the question is, okay, we have a white guy who looks like Jonathan going to be talking about racism. You know, what could possibly go wrong, right? So all I'll say now is I've been doing this work for a long time. I actually started in sort of the activism space back in Milwaukee, working with Reverend Jesse Jackson Jr. partially, not for long, amidst other things. And now I'm here at UW-Medicine in the Office of Healthcare Equity, and I'm also in the psychology department where we have a lab called the Center for the Science of Social Connection. And we study racism and bias and microaggressions and how all of this gets in the way of relationships, close personal relationships, which ultimately is what matters. In any event, I took this picture. We are closed, Black Lives Matter, last summer, just a sort of a reminder of what things were like, right? Back here in Seattle and across the world. And what a moment it was, right? What a unique moment that we all collectively went through and in some ways are still going through. And in a way, this talk was inspired in this moment. And I'll explain to you why that's the case in a little bit. But before that, a couple more acknowledgements. So there's a lot of discussion these days about these indigenous land acknowledgements that are made with more and more frequency in these sorts of talks. And in general, I think it's really important that we do acknowledge the land in this way. And if you're paying attention, the discussion has been one like, are these land acknowledgements just performative? Isn't there something deeper and more committed we should be doing other than just offering a slide at the beginning of a talk and then moving on? Furthermore, with respect to the particular tribes that we want to acknowledge here in what we now call Seattle, there's some conflict between the tribes that has been longstanding and has been simmering recently around who are the Duwamish and who is actually getting national recognition and things like that. So it's all very complicated. And I'm here to say we yearn to get it right, and we need to do better with respect to our indigenous communities. And it's a process. While we're on the topic of acknowledgements, I have quite a few. Often these thank yous are made at the end of an event or a talk. I really think it's important in my case to lead with the acknowledgements and the thank yous. And I want to start by saying it's really been a great experience to be on this PTSA DEI committee of Lincoln High School. And my colleagues on the committee, the latest chair, co-chair with me, Tara, the previous chair, Marissa and Carrie, the PTSA in general, Sochi and Katie, who have been in charge. It's just a great group of people to work with and to get work done with. And my particular acknowledgements don't stop there. The work that I'm going to be talking about today is by far a collective team effort. These are just some of the people who have been involved in the work over the years. I'm here speaking about it tonight, but it is not my unique work by any stretch. Okay, I think that's it for my preliminaries. I encourage everyone to use the chat as liberally as you would like. And in fact, it's not that big a group. People can even speak up. I assume most of you are muted right now. You can all practice how to unmute very quickly. You might not know this, I just learned this recently, by holding your spacebar down and unmuting. And so here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to count to 3. And on the count of 3, I want everyone who's presumably muted right now to hold their spacebar down and then all at the same time say, welcome, glad to be here, or something like that. Let's just get a whole bunch of voices in the room all at once. It'll be awkward and fun. Are you ready to speak? 1, 2, 3.
Hello.
Welcome, glad to be here.
Thanks for hosting.
Thank you for bringing us together.
All right, that worked. So feel free to make this as interactive as possible. I also recognize at the same time that people are at home, it's dinner time, there's dogs and cats and maybe who knows what, chickens and mice running around and children, of course, and everyone's leading their lives. And you know, if life intrudes behind you, that's okay. If a dog barks and you're unmuted, that's okay. You know, we're all in this together. So let's just keep it as casual as possible. Okay, so at all that said, because I'm just looking at my slides, I may not be able to notice the chat. So if anybody does have a comment or a question and it's put in the chat, I ask my colleagues to pay attention to that and to alert me if something should be addressed immediately and I'm not taking a look at it. Okay. So here we go. I started with that picture. I just ask all of you to reminisce for a second. Last summer, when George Floyd was murdered, the protests erupted around the country. And of course, we were in high pandemic mode, social distancing. This is a picture I took. I was at this protest here in Seattle with my family. Some of you might have been there. It was in the rain, and it was what we called a silent protest. It wasn't 100% silent, but it was, I would say, at times, eerily, beautifully, magically silent. People, thousands of people walking in the street, hearing the rain, hearing the sound of footsteps, the rustling of clothing, all in support of Black Lives Matter. For me, it was a memorable moment, and I suspect there were at least a couple of you who were a part of this protest march as well. Of course, many other things happened that summer, and I'm just asking everyone to try to cultivate that feeling that there was a collective, racial reckoning a lot, that feeling that something really big and important and transformative was happening, and we wanted to be a part of it, and we wanted to push it forward as strongly as we could. And yet, I don't know if this image rings a bell from last summer. This list of anti-racism resources was circulated online and over email, at least in my circles, if you remember this banner heading here. And everyone was trying to get active. And if you look at this particular list, and I've just picked this one out of the pile, there were others as well. This particular list had these following categories of things to do: how to get more involved. It gave a whole list of really smart articles to read, videos to watch, podcasts to subscribe to by mostly Black or BIPOC podcasters, books to read, films and TV series to watch, organizations to follow, and social media. And to be clear, it was a good list. It was a useful list. And I hope people did as many of this stuff as possible. And if that's all you did, and we call this anti-racism, then there's a bit of a problem here. And the problem is you could literally do everything on this anti-racism resources list and never actually get out of bed. And I feel compassion for this, because this is largely what I admittedly did as well at many points of my life. And it's hard to get out of bed. And this was relatively easy to do. If people have memories of this feeling or anything like that, again, I'm just welcoming people to put their thoughts or reactions in the chat as I'm talking, because I'm suspecting people have some feelings about what I'm saying right now. And while we are engaged in this sort of behavior, things are happening back in Minneapolis in this case. This is a picture of the protests right after, I don't remember exactly when it was taken, but last summer. And I was talking to a woman, a very nice white woman in a workshop, I can't remember when, who was telling me about her experience at the time. And it turns out she was in Minnesota when all this was going down. And we were talking about white privilege. And here's what she had to say. She said, since last summer, I am more and more aware of all of the choices I have that others don't have. I'm more aware of my privilege and how I don't have to worry about putting food on the table. I was actually in Minneapolis when George Floyd was murdered and the protest started. We were helping my son return home from college due to the pandemic. Just as the protests were erupting, we left and drove home. I was so aware of that privilege as we were driving home. It has been a big event in our family and allowed us to have a lot of conversations about it. So again, I have actually, in my case, considerable compassion for this. And I think I'm calling attention to it for reasons that you all understand. She didn't actually do anything here. And it raises the question, right? And I think Ijeoma Oluo, who is actually from here in Seattle, many of you have been exposed to her talks and read her books, so you want to talk about race. She puts it this way. She says, if BIPOC people can't touch or sense the impacts of your actions, you're not doing anything. You need tangible impacts to call yourself an anti-racist. And I think this is the dilemma many of us are in that I'm going to lean into today. Another voice on this matter, of course, is Ibram Kendi. And many of you, I assume, have read his books, Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist. This is not a quote from Kendi. This is my paraphrase of his quote. And for me, it clarifies a lot. And the first thing to notice about this paraphrase of his quote is that anti-racism, according to Kendi and many, many others, is a description of behaviors and beliefs. It's not a character description. It's not a personality description. It is not that I am an anti-racist and you are not, or vice versa. In other words, I can be racist one minute and anti-racist the next. It depends on what I am doing. And so it raises the most important question, which is, what is my behavior right now? And I will suggest that since you're all listening to me and I'm giving this talk, right now, your behavior on the continuum from completely racist to completely anti-racist is on the right side of the continuum. Obviously, it's passive and open to the criticism I just made a few minutes ago, or just listening to an event. But you're engaged in something, at least in the direction of anti-racist continuum right now, and that's important. Another question Kendi asked is, well, I should say another question Kendi asked us to ask ourselves is, what place am I most passionate about reforming? And then he suggests committing to the long-term struggle in that place and trying to engage in as much continuous action as possible to change your behavior on the system. So we're going to get into that in more detail. I just want to get this definition out in front of everybody to start.
Jonathan, there's a comment in the chat from Johnny about behaviors versus actions. Are they different or are they the same?
Yeah, we'll lump behaviors and actions in the same bucket. Is there a question behind the question, Johnny, or is that it?
No, just trying to figure out some subtleties that you'll probably get to in terms of, the concrete actions that I think sometimes you can enumerate and identify. Here's the first thing, second thing, third thing, versus I think behavior may be more like a certain theme, maybe more of a certain thread within the woven fabric, maybe.
Yeah, it's an interesting distinction that I think is worth pursuing. I have to admit, I haven't teased the distinction apart in that way. For the purposes of understanding my talk, I think thinking about your own behavior, your own actions, that's probably, we don't have to split it much more than that, I think, at this moment.
I think tying back to your last two slides, though, you can have beliefs in bed. And what Ijoma Ulua was pointing out is, well, what behaviors are you showing?
Yes. Okay, so by the way, thank you, Johnny and Camilla, for modeling just interacting and making this as interactive as possible. Please keep that up. I hope my responses were reinforcing of that behavior or action. Oops. I'll work on the distinction. So the final thing I'll say here in this introductory piece is that I believe everyone here tonight is here because we all share common values around this work. If you're here as a naysayer, or if you're here thinking people are going too far too fast, if you're here to criticize this, this is not the talk for you. This is a talk meant for people who are all on the same page with respect to values and wanting to get more active with respect to being continuously, consistently anti-racist, and recognizing that while we can profess these values, it's hard in life in general to align our behavior with our values, and even harder to sustain that alignment. So this is a picture of, that's Coach Carroll there, engaged in the Black Lives Matter protest, walking across the 520 bridge. And this idea that it's difficult to align our values with our behavior applies equally to the white people at the Black Lives Matter march and to the Black people at the Black Lives Matter march, that the obstacles are very different. The racial battle fatigue, the trauma, the hopelessness that is really an obstacle for so many of the people who are engaged in activism every day is sort of different from the obstacles that may show up for Coach Carroll and his anti-racism actions. And at the same time, how do we overcome these obstacles? There's a lot of commonality in what we need to do, which we'll get to in a few minutes. A couple more examples here. I just put these pictures up simply because they're personally inspiring to me. That's all. And it allows me to introduce this idea of mindfulness. So I don't know exactly what that man facing down the tank in this famous image at Tiananmen Square, I don't know what he was feeling. I don't know what was going on in his heart and mind in that moment. I like to imagine, however, that he was engaged in something that I would call mindfulness. that he had a deep centered connection to his body in that moment, to his values in that moment. He was being his best self. He knew what he was doing. Many of you have seen the video of Christian Cooper and Amy Cooper in Central Park last summer, which, by the way, happened the same weekend as George Floyd's murder. Many of you have seen this video, and I don't know what was going on in Christian Cooper's heart and mind when he had the kind of centeredness to respond to Amy Cooper. I'm sorry if you haven't seen this interaction, you'll have to look it up on your own. I can't explain it now. I don't know what was going on in Christian Cooper's mind in that moment when he videotaped Amy Cooper. But boy, was it inspirational. And I like to think that he was pretty centered in a mindful way. So I'm a clinical psychologist. Mindfulness is really important to this work. I'm not going to give you a scientific explanation or all the research, even though there is one nerdy research slide I'm going to share. But mindfulness is crucial, I believe, and the science supports, for moving us out of our beds and into action. So let's talk about all the obstacles for a few minutes. There are really larger, higher level obstacles that may make us feel hopeless. There are social systems and forces at work that seem beyond our control. Sometimes just when people mention terms like structural racism or systemic racism, that references this sort of abstract thing floating out there that's pulling all the strings that nobody seems to have any control over. Well, I'm here to say that on the one hand, I understand that hopelessness intimately. And on the other hand, there are things we can do. And the hopelessness should not keep us in bed. And the people who are truly committed, the activists, the people working in social justice, nonprofit organizations all around the country, they keep going day after day to fight this fight. And they need the support from the rest of us. Hopelessness is not a reason to stop. If we were to list the top 5 problems in our country, I don't know exactly what I would put at the top, depends on how I feel in the moment, but the simple fact of geographical racial segregation is probably in the top 5 for sure. And many of us feel that we would be better at being anti-racist if we simply could have more meaningful contact with Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, other people who are different from us. That lack of contact, that lack of relationships, the difficulty solving that problem seems to be an obstacle that keeps many of us in bed. I appreciate that obstacle. It is really hard. Can't make it go away. And there's stuff we can do. My final high-level obstacle, the soul-killing, what I call the soul-killing forces of the status quo and the daily grind. Oh my gosh, I'm just trying to get through my workday, and then I'm tired. And then the weekend comes. And my wife has to do laundry and shopping and doctor's appointments, and I'm just wanting to just watch TV or whatever it is in your family or my family. How do we find the energy to just do more than just get by? Well, makes sense, and we can do it. I'm going to drop down into the obstacles now at sort of a different level. Not necessarily different obstacles, sort of they're different obstacles, but this is more talking about obstacles in a different way. This is the way we tend to talk about the problems when we go to a typical diversity, equity, inclusion event. If you've gone to a workshop at work or listened to an event online, this is the modern language of racism, right? We talk about unconscious bias, racial trauma, fragility, social privilege, comfort. And in my opinion, this is just my opinion, these terms are important and point towards really significant problems and describe the problems well. But the problem with these terms is that they're not so good at identifying the obstacles to our action as we experience those in our bodies. And I think part of the goal is to figure out what's going on in our bodies such that we can do something about the obstacles in a quicker way. So I'm not pushing away these important terms of modern racism. I'm hopefully translating them into things that people may have an easier time identifying in their bodies. And to a certain extent, we're talking about overlapping circles. This is perhaps the most complicated slide I have to offer everybody today. The term paradoxical dichotomies is a term that I personally like. I've gotten good feedback on it from others. It's not my term. It was coined by my colleague, Dan Rosen. The slide actually itself was created by another colleague of mine, Michaela Ayers. If you like this work, I really encourage you to look up Michaela's work. She's organized this group called Nourish, that do diversity training. And what I want to say about this complex slide, these paradoxical dichotomies, is I think another way of identifying the obstacles that get in the way. And these obstacles apply to white people and to Black people, to BIPOC, to anybody who's trying to get engaged in this work. The obstacle is that we are often paralyzed by conflicting motivations, by seemingly being told to do two opposite things at the same time. So many white people, like myself, for example, are simultaneously told, you need to not make this about yourself. You need to decenter yourself. You need to follow, not lead. And at the same time, on the other side, we are told, you can't burden BIPOC. You can't expect them to tell you what to do. You need to take responsibility and do stuff yourself. So that's just sort of one example of what my colleague Dan calls a paradoxical dichotomy. You can see the others. On the one hand, we are told, well, this is similar, to seek BIPOC relations and feedback. We're going to make mistakes if we just try this on our own. And on the other hand, we're told we can't burden BIPOC. We have to figure this out on our own. On the one hand, we're told we have to do the internal work, that stuff I made fun of before in bed. We have to educate ourselves and grow, or else we're going to go out there and make mistakes. On the other hand, we have Ijeoma Oluo telling us we have to have an immediate measurable impact. We can't wait. If you're in the activism world, if you identify as BIPOC, you may be told you should be calling people in, but you're angry and justifiably angry, to be clear. And you're told that nobody should tone police you, and you should just express what you feel. So you're pulled in both directions there. Likewise, if you identify as BIPOC, you're told you can't do all this yourself. You have to take care of yourself. You have to engage in self-care. It's okay to say no. But on the other hand, you feel if you say no, you're going to leave it to all those white people and they're going to get it wrong. And so you're pulled in those directions. Some people who have mixed identities, like I know from many of my Asian friends, they feel on the one hand that they have an aspect of their identity that is very privileged, and then an aspect of their identity that is very oppressed. And they have this internal pull, this internal paradoxical dichotomy that's very hard to resolve as well. The main point I want to make with this complicated slide, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long, is that this pull in both directions can cause us to just do nothing. It can just cause us to slip into paralysis and just go to the status quo and do nothing. It's not easy to resolve this, but what I can say is it's not a solution to do nothing. You must find a way to hold all of this. We all must find a way to hold all of this and to keep moving forward actively. Another way to look at it.
Jonathan, sorry, there was just a question in the chat about who created this. Could you just say a little bit about Dan?
Dan Rosen is a clinical psychologist here in Seattle. He works at Bastyr University, and he's a colleague of mine who was on my thank you slide. He and I have been working on this together for the last 8 years, along with many others. And he's just a local, brilliant guy.
And a parent at Lincoln.
And a parent at Lincoln starting next year. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Here's another way to look at it. A lot of the advice we get from the mainstream kind of looks a little bit like this. White people, don't be fragile. Don't act on your privilege. Don't get too comfortable. Whatever you do, don't show any bias. Don't make mistakes. People of color, don't be angry. Don't call out. Don't engage in cancel culture. And whatever you do, all of you, none of you ever say the words critical race theory. because that's a disaster. And this is just a partial list. But the point is, all of this is what not to do, what not to do, what not to do. And if there's one thing I've learned as a psychological scientist, it's that avoidance and suppression, just telling people what not to do. Okay, let's be clear. On the one hand, it's useful because sometimes you just have to tell somebody to stop it, and that's good. But avoidance and suppression are not effective, long-term, sustainable behavior change strategies. Avoidance and suppression don't actually change behavior, don't grow behavior, it just stops behavior. We know this from all sorts of research. Here's where I'm going to get a little nerdy on the research. What's one of the best ways to gain weight, according to research? Well, it's to actually try to lose weight. Here's an interesting study. I wish I had one of soccer players to relate more to my personal passions. They put hockey players in front of an empty net, and they told half the hockey players, whatever you do, don't miss here. Don't miss here, whatever you do. Well, guess what? They're now more likely to miss to the very spot they're told not to miss at. Some of you may know the whole series of well-known white bear studies where they simply tell people, whatever you do, don't think about a white bear. Well, you may actually succeed at not thinking about a white bear, but then you'll get a rebound afterwards, but you'll be flooded with white bear thoughts later. So we can do better. We can do better. We need a better model than just telling people what not to do. We need support for getting more active. So now I want to ask you all this. Which of these actions did you do last month? I'm going to start with personal work. You don't have to respond in chat yet because I have a mechanism for you to respond if it works. Did you read something, watch a movie, attend an educational event, have a conversation with friends or family like that woman from Minneapolis did? About DEI, about anti-racism, did you do any of this personal work? And again, even though I'm a little critical of it, it's not that it's unimportant. It's more that we do the personal work for a reason. Why do we do the work? And the reason we do the personal work so that it's more than just an eat, pray, love moment for us is to be able to have an impact. And so the next question is, did you do any of this impact work last month? And this is just a partial example, a partial list for the sake of generating thought. Did you spend money in any BIPOC businesses? Did you donate to any social justice or other BIPOC-owned organizations? Did you attend a committee meeting at work on DEI? Everyone in this group can say yes to that. Did you do other DEI work at work, not a committee meeting, but actually engage in some actions? Did you go to an activism or advocacy event? Did you raise a concern about a colleague or something that was happening? Oh boy, that can get ugly quickly, right? We all know that. Did you engage in any bystander intervention, call out a colleague in the moment that it was happening? So let's see if this works. If you all have your computers, what I want to ask you to do now is log on to menti.com and enter in the code here. And when you've logged on and entered it in, then you can give an anonymous response that will let us look at what we look like collectively. And I hope you're all doing that right now. If you can't do it, I apologize. It might not work for everybody. It'll be okay. You can share publicly if you want, but I wanted this to be anonymous. And so go to menti.com, enter 53421239, and you should be able to vote. And what I want to ask you to do is just say, with this first question is just personal work. Did you do none, a little, some, a lot, or most of the time engaged in personal work? You get to decide what those terms mean. I'm not going to give you definitions for it. I'm going to open voting now. Please, somebody let me know if this is working or if I'm just talking. Oh, it's working. Oh my gosh, look at that. I have to start my countdown. We're going to do this for 59 seconds. It looks like I didn't need a whole minute. I think everyone is done. So if anyone wants to chat or just notice what they observe, people are saying most people are doing some or a lot of this personal work by their own definition. And to be clear, that's terrific. And this is what we expect. We're all on the same page here. A couple people are doing it most of the time. Wow. I don't know if I would say most of the time, but that's very impressive. Okay, I still have 30 seconds. How do I close voting? I'm so excited that this worked. I'm going to close voting now and go to the next slide. Okay. So I should have paid more attention to how many people voted. I apologize. I might not have done that right. I might have closed it too soon. Here's the next slide. Let's try this again. Slide is not active. Now, same question, but impact work. How much did you actually get out there, do some of this other stuff, which we understand is harder. So let's see what this looks like here. Well, it looks like I have 26 people who voted. So that's probably 28 people who voted. A couple more seconds, and then I'll close voting. All right. Let's see. Whoops, sorry, I went the wrong way. So here's personal work by your own definitions. I'm sorry I closed it before a couple of people were able to vote. And here is impact work by your own definitions. So ideally what we want, of course, is to move both of these to the right. And I now want to start talking about the various things that get in the way in a little more detail. Okay, so here's an example. Let's say we're all at curriculum night and the teacher is speaking to the parents. And in this fantasy version of curriculum night, the teachers have more than 4.5 minutes to speak to the parents, unlike what happens at Lincoln High School. But that's okay, they're doing the best they can, I understand. And he says to one of the parents, "Oh, you must be Booker's dad, nice to meet you." Well, some of you know where I'm going with this. The problem is that man's son's name is Jackson. It's not Booker. And to make the problem worse, this woman over here, she's thinking, Booker's my kid, not his. You mixed up the Black people. Now, the real problem is, for the sake of this example, let's imagine that all these other parents know each other and everyone knows that the teacher has made this mistake. So this is a moment, right, for bystander intervention. And my experience is that the bystanders, and I'll be honest, myself included, have great difficulty here. And these are some of the things that tend to show up for bystanders. It's not my responsibility to fix this, sort of this diffusion of responsibility. What if Jackson's dad doesn't want me to make an issue of this? How do I know he wants to be put on the spot like this? Oh my gosh, it's going to be so awkward if I say something. I just don't know if I can do it. Or perhaps something a little more dismissive or defensive. It's not that big of a deal. I don't want to make the teacher feel bad. So some of you might have heard me say this before. I use this example. It's just a slight variation on a theme that happens over and over again in many spaces, workspaces, public spaces. And I was in particular talking to a man for whom this happened. It happened at work. His name, I've obviously changed the details to protect him. I was talking to him about this afterwards. And it was the case that his 10 or 15 colleagues all knew that the person had, in this case, said his name wrong. And nobody spoke up. And so I asked him, and for the sake of this example, I'll call him Miguel. I asked Miguel, how would it have felt if one of your colleagues had spoken up in this moment and said, hey, his name's Miguel? And Miguel surprised me with his response. His response was, he started crying. He didn't start blubbering, to be clear. It was just a little moisture around his eyes, but he visibly started crying in response to my question about what if some of your friends had spoken up. And he said, it would have been so meaningful for me if one of them had spoken up, to know that I'm not always burdened with having to decide if I should speak up or not. to know that they've got my back like this. I would sleep better at night. And if any people in this audience, and I don't think there are any, are thinking, oh, it's not that big a deal, I can tell you in Miguel's case, he definitely woke up the next morning and didn't want to get out of bed and didn't want to go to work because this had happened the day before. And I share this example because I think these obstacles that get in the way are legitimate. It's legitimate to question, what if Jackson's dad doesn't want me to make an issue of this? You really don't know, and he really might not want you to make an issue of it. But again, what I do think happens over and over again is these kinds of obstacles default us to silence. And I want to question that default, and I want all of you to question that default, to take the risk, even if Jackson's dad in this case might say, yeah, I wish you hadn't done that. It's a different kind of problem to have. So I want to do a little exercise with y'all now. And it's an exercise about motivation. And I wanted to simply quickly talk about two different kinds of motivation. The first kind is what we'll call internal motivation. And that's here on the right. The idea of internal motivation is you're essentially motivated to act in non-prejudiced ways because it's personally important to you. And on the left is what I'll call external motivation, where you're motivated to act to appear non-prejudiced because you're wanting to avoid disapproval, you don't want to make mistakes, you don't want to get called out. And let's be honest, most of us feel both sources of motivation all the time and at different times. Motivation here is not a personality or character trait. It's a state of mind that changes depending on the situation. I'm going to skip these two slides here. So I would like to ask all of you to think about, if you can't think of a situation that applies to you personally, just plop yourself down in that scenario with Jackson's dad. And imagine yourself as a bystander. Or you can come up with a different situation that happened to you recently that may fit your experience better. And I first want to ask you, and if you want to chat anything, you can, what obstacles might get in the way of you speaking up in that moment? I named some. Are there any other ones that you can chat and say, here's what might keep me quiet in this moment? And I want to just give you all a minute, or maybe somebody wants to hold the space bar down and unmute and talk about an obstacle as well right now. What might an obstacle be? So feel free to chat something or say something. And I'm actually trying to find my chat right now so I can see if anybody's chatting anything, but I can't find it yet. Oh, here it is. Oh, good. Uncertainty about the social rules. Thank you. I'd struggle with what to say, just not knowing what to say. I'm not sure if I have the story right. Okay, well, for those of you, oh, somebody going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to ask a clarifying question, Jonathan. Are you saying that the teacher said, oh, you must be the first name kid's dad, and then nobody corrected him?
That's correct. That's correct. He's confusing the two Black parents, and nobody's pointing out that he's confused the two Black parents. Got it?
Yeah, I got it. I'm not sure why nobody would say anything.
Well, we're getting a list of reasons why people wouldn't say anything. And if it would be easy for you to say something in that moment, that's fantastic. And that's what we're after. And I want to validate that for many people, it's actually hard to speak up in this moment for various reasons. And for the sake of this exercise right now, I want everybody to consider what these reasons that might get in the way are, and also simply what you might be feeling in your body. Like embarrassed is to speak up in a group setting is great. Like I know I would probably be feeling just a little panicky feeling and trying to sort out what to do and wishing I could essentially call a timeout in the universe so I could think it through, because my brain doesn't think as quick as I want it. And if I could just think it through and sort it out, I'd have enough time, but I'd be panicking. So I want you all to consider that these obstacles that we're generating right now, and thank you for the additional chat comments. These obstacles that we're generating right now are like passengers on a bus. And the idea is that you, in fact, are the bus driver. And you will go to the next stop and open the door, and onto the bus comes uncertainty. And uncertainty sits down and starts telling you all about uncertainty. And then you go to the next stop, and onto the bus comes panicky and nervous. And panicky and nervous starts talking in their seat about how panicky and nervous they are. And you go to the next stop, and you bring on the next obstacle, embarrassment. Well, I guess I've said enough of them now. So the idea of this metaphor here to move us into mindfulness is I want you to consider these obstacles as like passengers on your bus. Now, the next piece of this puzzle here is you're the bus driver and you get to decide where to drive the bus. And in the service of that, I would like all of you to consider one word, or maybe two words, that just identifies who you really want to be in a situation like this. This is back to this idea of internal motivation. What internally motivates you? Who's your best self when it comes to being an anti-racist in this moment? And if you're willing, just chat one or two words that points you in that direction. So for me, for example, well, I'll be honest and sort of sappy, I might simply put the word love or compassion. Somebody else might put the word courage. I'm just giving you examples. I don't want to tell you what words to put. But if you're willing to just chat a word that identifies your value, your goal, what direction are you driving towards here? Thank you. Empathy, brave, peace, welcoming, inclusive, ethics. Thank you. These are great words. I'm not reading all of them anymore. I'm a little lost. Humble but brave. Oh, I like that combination. Even though you did not follow my rule of only putting one or two words, it's a nice sentence. Justice is a good word. Thank you, everybody. So the question here, as we start thinking about how to overcome these obstacles, is to try to use this metaphor, if it's useful, as a way of saying to yourself, we don't actually have to make all these obstacles go away. We don't have to even silence them. We just have to have clarity on our values and goals in the moment and who we want to be, and sort of a body memory that we can keep driving towards our goal, no matter which passengers are on the bus, no matter how loudly they're yelling at us in our heads. This is, of course, easier said than done, but hopefully that's a way to enter into this. So that's the first taste of mindfulness. I suspect many of you know what mindfulness is. Some of you have mindfulness practices that are much more advanced than mine, and others may dismiss the whole thing as a bunch of crazy Seattleite tree-hugging liberals who are doing silly stuff. I'm here to say scientifically, it's 100% clear that mindfulness can help across the board of important human stuff, whether it's decreasing depression, anxiety, stress, or whether in this case, it's increasing value-guided behavior, getting you in front of that tank, so to speak. Mindfulness can help. The science is clear. This is just one study showing that a 10-minute mindfulness meditation can decrease implicit bias related to race and decrease implicit bias related to age using this test called the implicit attitude test, the IAT, which some of you may be familiar with. Doesn't really matter what the test is. What's important here is to show that just 10 minutes of mindfulness practice gets a measurable effect. You do mindfulness, you're now less likely to act with bias. You're less likely to harm somebody with an innocent but harmful, racially offensive comment, a microaggression. And you're more likely to engage the way you want. The problem here is that mindfulness doesn't last. You have to develop a practice or a discipline. These results don't last.
I'm using my space bar here.
Yeah, Frank, as you speak, Marissa, Frank, can you mute?
Yeah, he's doing it. I apologize once more. Could you just say a couple of sentences to define mindfulness?
Mindfulness is a quality of attention that is exquisitely focused on the present moment with acceptance. So that's a mouthful. It's a quality of attention that is exquisitely focused on the present moment with acceptance. What I can do instead of giving a definition is walk you through a brief mindfulness exercise, which is what I was hoping to do right now.
Thank you.
So this is an exercise called the hand on the door mindfulness. And the reason I like this is because you can do it for 20 seconds or 30 seconds. So for those of you who are not too familiar with mindfulness, you may conjure up these stereotypes of lighting incense and pillows and whale music or whatever and having to sit for 30 minutes. And by the way, I'm not against that. Having that kind of discipline and practice, I think, is very important. I particularly have a great difficulty staying focused on that. But what I am saying is you can also do mindfulness on the fly, in the moment, or right before the moment. So the idea is that you've got your hand on the door. You're about to turn the door and go into a room and be with some people. Or perhaps in pandemic times, it's not so much a hand on the door, but it's your finger on the return button. You're about to hit return and enter into a Zoom meeting. Something's about to happen, and you want to bring your best self to that interaction. You're about to interact with someone who's different from you, and you don't want to microaggress. You want to engage and not be scared. So your hand's on the door. 20 seconds of breathing. I'll walk you through it if you're willing. Imagine right now you're about to enter a meeting. Maybe you can imagine, if you don't have anything more to imagine, that you're about to go to curriculum night, back when curriculum night was in person, or a work meeting. You get to choose. Your hand's on the door. You're about to go into the room. You can feel the cool brass on your fingertips. Now for 30 seconds, let's breathe. You can do this with your eyes open, or you can do this with your eyes closed. It's your choice. Either way, just gently focus your attention on your breath. The only thing you have to do for the next 15 seconds, your only task in the universe, is to breathe. And notice what it feels like to breathe. Just take one gentle breath in and fully luxuriate in the feeling of breathing. Sometimes with just a breath or two, you can now feel yourself centering a little more. You can notice your mind with a little more clarity. You can notice what you feel with a little more clarity. And as you breathe in, you can try to expand like a water balloon. Fill up with breath. Fill up with feelings. You don't have to change anything going on inside you. You can feel all of it. So the idea is breathe in, notice your mind and feelings, practice acceptance. And now, on your next out breath, I want you to state that word to yourself that you came up with a few minutes ago. So it's breathe in, notice yourself, notice your feelings with acceptance. Breathe out, compassion. Courage. Whatever that word is, breathe out and say it to yourself. That's the whole meditation. Then you turn the door and go in. It's of course not going to solve everything. Life is hard, and this doesn't make life easier. But if you practice it, develop a discipline, or find your own variation on it, it can help you center just enough to get through those difficult moments, such that you're more likely to be your best self. You're more likely to stand up and be a good bystander. You're more likely to overcome whatever obstacles are in your life. Next example, and I'm almost.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, we had a question in the
Oh,
chat
good.
from Sherry. She asked about mindfulness is human kindness.
There's a considerable research and practice predating research suggesting that variations on mindfulness meditations can cultivate a great deal of compassion and kindness and connection with the human universe. And so that's certainly another benefit of it. Did I get at your question, Sherry, or your comment?
Yes, she said thank you.
I believe in the case of that scenario that I suggested before with the teacher and Jackson's dad, again, we're not going to solve everything, but a little centering, a little breath, a little connection with values would potentially help the teacher acknowledge what happened and apologize well if he got called in on it, would potentially help Jackson's dad respond however he wanted to respond. I'm not here to tell Jackson's dad what to do, but for Jackson's dad to find his center so he could respond in ways that he felt good about later that night when he was trying to fall asleep. And of course, could help the bystanders be who they want to be. Okay, last example. This is a North End school. If anyone recognizes the uniforms, it's this Roosevelt. I could have picked another North End school. I think you get the idea. Let's just imagine the game has just ended. The North End High School team has beaten the South End High School team 8-0. You're in the stands. A Black North End parent next to you says the following: "Why are we even celebrating? I feel sick to my stomach. This wasn't a soccer game. It was a demonstration of white privilege." Let's imagine that your son, or if you have to switch it, your daughter or non-binary kid, whoever it may be, is out there on the field playing and was part of this victorious team. And you're hearing this person say this. And maybe you're feeling a little defensive about your kid. So I ask you all to breathe now and ask yourself, how might you respond? And my slide is not active, so let me make it active. You can go back to your mentee if you're willing. And the way this works is you have 100% that you can divvy up among these choices. So for example, you'll see the choices in Menti. Something's not actually, I have to reset it here. I'm sorry. Let's see if this works. 10 seconds here. Reset results. Well, you'll see it in Menti. The idea is that you can divvy up your 100% to say how likely you would be to respond in these various ways to get to as close to 100% as you can. And let's see what your response looks like in this moment here. So I'm going to start the countdown. Shoot this in. All right.
What's the one with no label?
You should see the label when you get to your computer. Something's going wrong on my screen here, but I believe in Menti.
It's not showing ours either.
All right, well, let's just skip that one. Something went wrong with Menti. In fact, I guess, why don't you all just use that as an other? No.
I think someone says they see it as 100% agree with you on that statement. Does anybody else see that?
No, I'm saying that I agree with the gentleman to his statement that it's an example, just a demonstration of white privilege. That would be my response to him.
Oh, okay. I thought it was the one that was blank. Thank you.
Of course.
I love that we took the suggestion and ran with it.
Well, of course, there's no one right answer here. There are certainly answers that are better than others. I do think something went wrong with the question, so I apologize about that. But as you're fiddling with this, and some of you are still playing with your answers, I really just wanted people to wrestle with what might show up for you in your bodies. And if somebody has another comment or chat they want to make, the real question I want to ask at this point is there a gap between what you wish you would say and what you would be likely to say, given how you might be feeling in the moment? And the encouragement is to try to say all of the good stuff, and to recognize that even though this parent next to you who made this comment might have said this in a sarcastic or even funny way, she's saying she's sick to her stomach. And it's actually a fairly vulnerable thing for her to say to you. And it suddenly becomes an actually important moment for you to get this right with her as an anti-racist, for you to be validating. And my encouragement is to look for moments like this and recognize that these are rare and really important. And we want to try to say as much as we can to be validating and to take this kind of stuff very seriously. In the service of that, I'm going to now move on to the next slide. I see this didn't quite work as well for all of you. I apologize about that. I want to suggest a couple of ideas here, and then I'm going to wrap up and open it up for questions. I want to suggest that at the heart of this is a struggle that we all have in life, that it's hard to feel hard stuff. And we do this every day. We try to just feel good and not feel the hard stuff. We're very well practiced at avoiding discomfort. And this work, anti-racism work, is a lifelong struggle to lean into discomfort. Interaction after interaction is going to be awkward and uncomfortable. Somebody's going to be upset with you. And I want to suggest the possibility, as a way of leaning into discomfort, that your worst fears are true. I don't know exactly what your worst fears are, but I want you to consider the possibility, just for a moment in your mind, in your body, that there's something you're really scared of, and it's actually true. And whatever you may be thinking of right now, and I don't want anyone to lean into anything particularly traumatic as you do this, but as you think of the stuff that you're scared of, consider just what it feels like to lean into this feeling rather than push it away. Say, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to think that my worst fears are true. I'm going to not think about it. And if you can feel that tension in your body, I want to suggest that that's good. Feeling that tension in your body, staying with it, whatever your worst fears are. Getting used to that feeling is actually part of the work of moving from ally to anti-racist. It's part of the work of getting out of bed, because getting out of bed and doing this work brings on that feeling over and over again. I don't know what your worst fears are. For me, in this world, it could be being called a hypocrite. For me, it could be making a mistake and having a whole bunch of people angry at me. It could be a Black colleague telling me, you're not all that, Jonathan. You got your fancy house. I'm not quite sure exactly how I would define my worst fears. And I'm also not claiming I'm any better at opening up to them and accepting them than the rest of us. I am asking y'all to join me in this struggle of breathing in, expanding, part 2, like a water balloon, trying to make room for all of it rather than pushing it away, because pushing it away may make us feel better in the moment, but it's not a growth strategy. Expanding like a water balloon, how much can we hold? I sometimes think if there's one lesson from this pandemic, from this last year and a half or two of the pandemic and racial injustice coming to the fore in our country, if there's one lesson in all of it, it may be that I can actually expand and increase my capacity to feel the pain and suffering and struggles of others like a water balloon without breaking. I can keep expanding. And I can keep searching for empathy of Jackson's dad in that earlier example, for empathy towards this woman in the stands at the soccer game who's telling her she's sick to her stomach because of the score of the game. Keep searching for empathy. It's not easy. It's the lifelong pursuit. So I don't have time to give you too much more. I will say that I've gone over these first 4 of what I like to call my top 10. They're not really my top 10. It's my colleagues, my work's top 10. I've been a part of it. I shouldn't have called it my top 10. I went over these 4. I just want to note that there's a lot more to say that I knew I wouldn't have time for, but I at least wanted to just give you a list of 10. Devoting our life to real contact with people who are different from us. It's hard in the pandemic. It's hard with segregation, but we have to recommit over and over again to real contact, real relationships, not tokenizing people, but just working towards meaningful relationships with people who are different from us so we can really experience the full diversity and beauty of this world. And we can support people as much as we want to. When in the bystander role, it's hard. Just say something, anything, get something out of your mouth. There's a lot of work on how to be a good bystander. They tell you all these fancy things to say. I say, just say something, anything, don't be silent, and then expect defensiveness. Work on your own defensiveness. If I had another hour or 2, I would talk to you about defensiveness and what a crippling problem it is in this work. Embracing humility. Find your passion, capitalize on your strengths. I don't know what your passion is, what your strengths are. If you're an architect, well, then you can work on building houses after the hurricane. That was a terrible example. I apologize about the lack of nuance in my example, but I do believe you get the idea. Whatever you are good at, you can bring that to bear in this work. That's what Ijeoma Oluo and many others are asking you to do. Plan your work and work your plan. It's not enough to just try every day. Make a plan, make a commitment. And most of all, don't do this alone. And this is what I'm really hoping we can accomplish in this work together on this committee, in this group, on the north side of Seattle, throughout Seattle. Let's get together. We can't do this alone. It's too hard. It's too painful. It's too isolating. We make too many mistakes. We need support. And one way to not do this alone is to make a public commitment to each other or to somebody you care about in your family, your spouse, your children, if the relationship is appropriate. Tell them, I need to get more active in anti-racism and I need your support and I would love for you to join me. Let's do this together. We can't do it alone. So I'm going to skip this. I'll go to here. Final quote from Ijeoma Oluo. She says, and this is actually how she ends her book. It's one of the last paragraphs of the book. So you want to talk about race? She says, all around the country, people are affecting real change with small actions. Change that improves the lives of people of color in their towns and cities and weakens an oppressive system. Racial oppression starts in our homes, our offices, our cities, and our states, and it can end there as well. We can do this together. So there's much more to say. Again, I'm the worst self-promoter in the world. I want to be absolutely clear with everybody. There's no income in this for any of us. So that said, if you like this way of thinking, we would love your support for the fundraiser, which is a course where we're going to get into all this in much more detail over 6 weeks. We would love your support in spreading the news about the fundraiser so we can get as many people signed up for it as possible. But I'm not here to promote the fundraiser. I'm here to just give this talk. So I think I'll stop now. And we do have about 15 or so minutes for any conversation or questions or reactions that people may have. So thank you very much. And if you're willing for this conversation to turn your video on, of course, you can choose not to because life. But if you're willing to turn your video on, I would love that as well.
So I wanted to put Cherry's comment into, give it airtime. She says, I would say as a woman of color, our lived in, our lives and daily experience is racism. If in doubt, if of wanting to say something, if you hear something, please do. When you do, you give us a voice in the moment.
Thank you, Cherry. And what I would love to do is supplement and amplify that. In our work that we do at UW Medicine, we have these groups of white people. I know not everyone on this call is white, but in UW Medicine, we have affinity groups. And so I'm working with the white people, and they're constantly asking, what should I do? How do I get more involved? There's all this different stuff to do. And we get feedback from our Black and other people of color colleagues very clearly that they think, of course, it's important to work on system and policy change and pipeline issues and all of that stuff, of course. But what they really want is the quality of their day-to-day experience improved. They really want to be able to go through the day without getting microaggressed on all over the place. And they really want our support as white people talking to other white people and working on our own selves, such that when our Black colleagues and other BIPOC colleagues and LGBTQ colleagues and religious minority colleagues and all of our colleagues who are different from us and not in the mainstream go to work every day, they feel included and welcomed and supported as much as possible and don't feel excluded and marginalized and microaggressed against and isolated. It's that day-to-day stuff that matters to people's quality of life. Sorry, that was a long supplement to what you said, Sherry. Okay, so you're all just sort of not sure what to say or do. So let me ask you this question, and feel free to say something publicly or chat a response. What's one thing you're taking away from this that you would like to do differently? I ended with this idea of a public commitment. Let's see how this goes for a minute. Anyone want to offer something up there? You're free to choose not to. Are you waving goodbye to somebody, Shelley, or are you wanting to say something?
Saying hi. Yeah. So my daughter just started at Ballard High School this year, and she's Black, and my husband and I are white. And so we have an interesting setup already in the North End, and she's had some experiences. We went to Whitman Middle School, where we, a group of us parents, got an equity committee started. And it was an uphill battle. So it sounds like Ballard is a lot more supportive, and I'm really excited to see that Lincoln is working on this. And I'm hoping that I can find a way to cooperate and dovetail our efforts more. So I'm going to be visiting the PTSA, the Ballard PTSA next week at their meeting, and talk about starting an equity focus with the PTSA there. So if you all have any ideas how to help with that, that'd be awesome. And then I'm just going to let them know that I've been attending these, and maybe we can piggyback on some of your ideas. And then I'm also on a group with the school itself, and I think it's called the Diversity and Equity Committee. It's a parents, and it's started by the school administration. So I'm hoping that there's going to be a way to cross over those efforts as well. So I'm all in the early stages of this, but yeah, and so I have some other parents that I had worked with at Whitman that are interested in helping as well. But I was interested about the recording from tonight's session. Is that going to be available after? Because one of the other parents that I work with, she wasn't able to make it.
Yeah, we'll have that available in the next couple of days. So if we have your email information with their registration, I can probably send that to you or make it available. Yeah, but I will try to make it available so that we probably can send it out in email afterwards.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And Shelley, too, I would say on behalf of the DEI committee at Lincoln, we could invite you to one of our meetings just to share best practices with you, because we're relatively new as well. We just started last year. So you know, hopefully we can enlighten you and you can enlighten us. That would be great.
Share info. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, let me just say real quickly that without getting into the weeds, because not everyone here is on a DEI PTSA committee, but in general, I know, speaking for the other members of our committee and co-chair Tara, that we feel strongly that, okay, on the one hand, we're Lincoln parents, we want to support Lincoln, we want to get DEI moving at Lincoln. On the other hand, we realize that what's happening at Lincoln is not really unique to what's happening at any of the other North End schools. And if there's a way we can join together collectively, there is so much more power in collective action, and really think about this as a community-wide issue. I think there's great strength and power in that. And so any ways we can come together and work together and collaborate would be, I think, speaking for all of us, we're all in on that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Other speak up or chat about what one takeaway you're taking from this?
Hi, Jonathan. It's Sarah from Roosevelt.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. I liked your focus on mindfulness. I think that's really spot on. I'm wondering what your advice is for people who hear that word mindfulness and shut down and go into the, oh, you're the yoga mat carrying, latte drinking, liberal Seattleite. You know, you be you. You've lost me there. Because I agree that the mindfulness would solve so many things. But for a lot of people, once you say that, they shut the door.
Yeah, and I knew I was in a relatively safe crowd using that language here tonight.
Right.
I can say that, you know, it's an issue just as a clinical psychologist trying to teach clients to slow down and breathe, to get over any problems. So I don't know if I have a quick answer. I do know there are other people here who practice mindfulness and do this work who actually may have better suggestions than I do. I will simply say that the word mindfulness is so not the issue. So, you know, I think any way we can simply get somebody to sort of slow down, take a breath, and not just be reactive, to sort of get better at noticing what's happening inside our bodies in order to control our expressed behavior better. There's a lot of language that can be used to try to suggest that to people. And I have to admit that trying to convince people who are naysayers, who are dismissive, who aren't bought in, is one of my biggest frustrations in life. And I can't say I've cracked that nut.
Well, maybe we need mindfulness to deal with the people who don't want to talk about mindfulness.
Yeah, for me, that's really the issue, that after I've had a difficult interaction with somebody a conservative person who has just told me that the whole thing is a bunch of hooey and affirmative action is ruining America, I have to just work on my own hopelessness and find a way to get out of bed and keep going in the morning. And so that's where it shows up for me in those moments. Yeah. Noah. You got your hand up.
I do. In terms of things we commit to doing after this, I'm intrigued by you saying that what you've heard from people of color is that they want their day-to-day lives to be less, like, have less microaggressions, less abuse in the workplace. What I can do with that then is I can get better at calling people in and calling people out when I see things that are wrong. I think part of where I went wrong over the past year was I got a little too fixated on the grand, the big systemic issues, which are hugely important. But it's like, but then I feel powerless because it's like, well, I can't really fix a lot of those, but in my own workplace, in my day-to-day life, when I see stuff like that, I can take action on those things. So I'm going to commit to trying to do more of that.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. Thanks, Noah. And I just want to name I think that's great. And the action is exactly what I love. And I just want to name what I call the paradoxical dichotomy in that move. which is that, and I think many of us will know what I'm talking about when I name it. I think what sometimes we can see is primarily white people in primarily white spaces just sort of canceling each other and calling each other out on things that actually are, it's more of it's a performative wokeness competition than it is actually addressing significant harm. And it's all very nuanced. And I don't know if I said that with enough nuance, because
no, I do know what you're talking about.
It's sensitive stuff. And so, but I do think the bigger problem is that most of us are not compelled to be just like hyper calling people out for even the smallest little mistake. That's not what most of us are doing. Most of us are actually struggling with not speaking up enough. And so that's where my energies lie, in trying to get more people to speak up, and then we'll deal with all the excessive canceling as that shows up as necessary. But that's a secondary problem, I think.
What's been interesting for me is my anxiety about doing that, for just speaking purely for myself, my anxiety about being excessive canceling has actually kept me from speaking up in situations where I think I maybe should. But that's also a real thing, to be clear.
Yeah, that's the paradox that I think often paralyzes us and then keeps us quiet.
Yeah.
So I think related, I wanted to go back up a few comments in the chat. It was kind of an interpretation of what to do with Jackson's dad. Like, was it just to say something in the moment to make sure that everyone knew that Jackson's dad was, or it was that the opposite the opposite parents that were in the room, like sometimes for me, speaking in a big group is too much. But one thing that I have tried to work on is speaking individually, and so I can like talk to the parent later on, or and say, like, you know, I saw that and I felt it too, like the naming of the child, and also like, and also talk to the teacher individually. Like for me, speaking in the big group is scary, but it can be a little less scary to talk individually, and that way, like that, just like noticing the microaggression, I hope helps the person, the BIPOC parent, feel like that situation was seen, and then also, yeah, just so, I don't know, for me, and like working with individuals might be a way to to ease into it.
And Tara, you know, the way I'll put it to supplement, I think what you're saying is actually very important, and it aligns with a couple things that I've said, and I think this may be my last word here before I say goodnight to everybody. It's number one, this idea of finding your strengths, right? And so, you know, being an anti-racist doesn't require everybody to become great public speakers, or to stand up in front, you know, in a group of 100 people and, you know, be that person in front of the tank. I know you, Tara, and I know how sensitive and compassionate you are. And I do believe that one-on-one, you can actually say something really meaningful, and that's your strength. And other people will have other strengths. I do think with respect to the Jackson's dad scenario, the worst case scenario is that nobody said anything, and then Jackson's dad goes home and nobody says anything, and he's alone in it. That's a killer for Jackson's dad, that he gets no support whatsoever. Second worst case scenario is a couple people email some weak support saying they were too scared to speak up or whatever, and hope he's well, and then nobody does anything. But that's not as bad as nobody reaching out at all. That's just isolation and exclusion. So again, I can't tell people what to do, but I can say, notice the impulse towards silence and inaction, and that's the first battle to overcome. And then we grow, and then we get better, and then we improve. So we're out of time. I'm happy to keep talking because this is what I thrive on. I'm also happy to talk to people over email or in other ways. But thank you all for spending an hour and a half with us tonight. And I think we should stop now.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank everyone for
All right,
coming.
good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much, Jonathan.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you.